Like a backstage pass to the world of fly fishing travel, this is Waypoints, the podcast of destination angling. News and events, helpful travel tips, destination profiles, great stories, and expert advice from some of the most seasoned and experienced names in fishing travel. Waypoints is brought to you by Yellow Dog Fly Fishing Adventures, the industry's #1 specialty travel company for the very best insider knowledge, logistical support, and trip preparation. Freshwater or saltwater, international or domestic, Yellow Dog has you covered for your next fishing adventure. And now, your Waypoints host, Yellow Dog founder and director, Jim Klug.
I'm sitting down today with two gentlemen that know a lot about fishing in Belize, Matt KELSIC and BRYAN GREGSON. Matt manages and directs the Belize offerings for Yellow Dog, with responsibility for what is Yellow Dog's largest overall program. In his role as Belize program manager, Matt works directly with every lodge and almost every guide in the country, sending hundreds of people a year south to fish the productive waters of this tiny Caribbean country. Matt has visited all of Yellow Dog's lodges multiple times over the years, and without question, he is one of the industry's foremost experts when it comes to traveling in Belize and planning Belizean fishing packages. The second person joining me today is BRYAN GREGSON, a person who has always been a big part of this podcast. BRYAN is one of the most well-known and accomplished photographers in the fishing industry, a seasoned veteran who has been the recipient of numerous awards and large-scale assignments. His work has included everything from major magazine covers to groundbreaking cinematography shorts. And over the years, he's worked with Patagonia, Volvo Cars, Scott Fly Rods, Hatch, Scientific Anglers, the Drake, and dozens of other brands, conservation groups, and publications. BRYAN is also the director of photography at Yellow Dog, a role that allows him to travel the world, visiting numerous lodges and operations in Yellow Dog's lineup. He has visited and fished Belize dozens of times, and BRYAN knows these fisheries and the country on a level that is matched by few others. Gentlemen, thanks for being here and welcome to Waypoints.
Thanks, Jim.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Jim.
Well, today we are talking Belize, and honestly, this episode has been a long time coming. Belize is, for good reason, one of the most popular destinations in the entire world of saltwater fly fishing, and it is and always has been Yellow Dog's #1 most popular destination for saltwater. Matt, you run the program. We send a ton of anglers to this small Central American country every year, and today we're going to dive into the details on why this is such a special destination and why it is so popular with traveling anglers. So for Yellow Dog, Belize is not only an incredibly important program, but it is also where the company was actually started back in 1999. And I think a lot of people don't know this, but in the very beginning, when Yellow Dog was literally a one-man, one-dog operation, all that we offered were trips to Belize. In fact, our very first catalog was a simple trifold brochure that included only 4 options, and they were all in Belize. For the first several years, that is what we focused on exclusively. So it's really where the company was kind of born and bred. And we have deep ties to this country and to the 16 operations that we currently work with and represent. Over the years, we have sent thousands and thousands of anglers to fish in Belize, and it is indeed one of our favorite places to visit, certainly to fish, and of course, always to talk about. In 2006, I wrote and published a book called Flyfishing Belize, which was still one of my favorite projects I've ever worked on. This book provided kind of an in-depth look at not just the country and the fishing, but really the history of fly fishing down there, which a lot of people don't realize. It was kind of the cradle of so much of what we do today, way back in the day. But it's a fun book. If anyone can still find a copy, I encourage you to grab it. But provides a lot of detailed information and breakdowns for Belize's different fishing areas and regions. Now, all three of us, BRYAN, Matt, myself, we get pretty excited when talking about Belize, as this is a country that we know and love. And Matt and BRYAN, I know you guys also love sharing your knowledge and enthusiasm about Belize with anglers and travelers whenever you can. And we've got a lot to talk about. In fact, we are going to do what we're calling the Belize episodes in 2 parts, all right? And today in part 1, we're going to review some of the basic country facts. We're going to talk about travel logistics and how to get to Belize, discuss the species found throughout the country. We'll talk gear and equipment, some of our favorite flies. We'll have a conversation about the lodge and all-inclusive options versus possible DIY, do-it-yourself scenarios. We're going to talk about the characteristics and professionalism of Belize guides. We'll cover trip costs, general safety, and more. In the second episode that'll follow this one, part 2 of this series, we will then take a deep dive into the different fisheries and locations found throughout Belize. Basically, we'll do a tour of the options and the destinations of Belize from north to south. That's coming up in part 2. But for now, guys, let's start off and share with our listeners some of the basic facts about the country, a few things that people may not know about the country of Belize. Now, a lot of people have been there. They've certainly heard about it. It's very much on the radar of traveling anglers these days. I feel like 20 years ago, this was kind of one of those super exotic places where not too many people had fished. Today, it's become a little bit more mainstream for good reason. But we'll throw one out for all of the history buffs here. If you are of a certain age and you grew up with your high school geography textbooks, up until 1981, Belize was actually British Honduras, all right? In 81, the country attained its independence. It changed its name to Belize. But going back before that, it was British Honduras, still a protectorate of the UK, even today. But it's a country, it's located in Central America. If you're trying to get a picture of this, it's just to the south of Mexico's Yucatan. It's got Guatemala to the west, Honduras to the north. And it is the second smallest country in all of Central America land-wise. It also has less than 400,000 people total for its population, making it one of the least populated countries in the world. So it's got a lot of cool things going for it. Matt, it's not a big country land-wise. In fact, you would compare it to what?
You know, Belize is about the same size as some of our New England states, Vermont, Massachusetts. It's easy to get around. You can drive from the coast to the Guatemala border on the west in less than 2 hours.
Tiny country. Yeah. And one of the other cool things about it is the language down there, Brian.
Yeah, Belize has a wide range of dialects, from Spanish speaking to Garifuna to Creole and, of course, English.
And English is the official language of the country. It's the only Central American country where English is the official language, so it makes it very easy to travel, to communicate.
Super easy.
Everybody down there speaks English.
Everyone.
Oftentimes, they, as you said, they speak Garifuna, they speak Creole, but everybody speaks English, so pretty nice for travel.
It makes it super easy.
Yeah, and another part of that is all the signs are in English. So coming through the airport, getting out, going to town, whatever. Not confusing
Pretty
for an
friendly.
American traveler. Yeah,
that's right. And speaking of tourists, there's a little over 1 million tourists a year that come to this tiny country. About 70% plus are American tourists. It's just so easy to get there. It's obviously a great fishing destination, which is what we're talking about today, but it's also a world-class, well-known dive destination. So just like, anglers flock to this country for the species that are found there, divers love Belize because it's easy to access. There's tons of dive sites all throughout the country. It's pretty spectacular. But for both anglers and divers, there's about 400 different species of fish that are found in the waters of Belize, mostly along that 185-mile barrier reef that runs the entire length of the country. So a little bit about Belize there, just to kind of give you an overview.
Right.
Yeah. Let me ask you this, Brian. Let's start right off. When it comes to Belize, for anglers, why? What is it about Belize that is such a draw?
I think Belize offers a variety of angling experiences. There's something for everybody there, whether you're I've never ever done this before, or you're a tier 1 advanced angler. And I think not a lot of destinations offer the wide variety that Belize has. For me personally, I'm going there for the Spring Creek of permit fishing and the outer atolls. That's very difficult.
You like the challenge of that?
I love the challenge. And I'm very aware of my own expectations of what's going to happen. Belize is fascinating for the permit thing, but there's also, tarpon and snook and bonefish. throughout the entire country, which is nice for all kinds of anglers.
Absolutely. So it really, depending on wherever you fall into the spectrum as far as your experience or your skill
There's
set.
something for everyone.
Something for everybody, which is huge. One of the big draws there. And of course, that diversity of species that you just mentioned too, which we're going to talk more about.
And as small as it is, compared to a lot of other destinations, it's very spread out. You know, just say you're in Ascension Bay. Well, there's a lot of
in
lodges
Mexico,
in one bay.
Right.
And Belize has a variety where you have outer atolls as the second largest Great Barrier Reef. There's north and south and central. So you're very spread out.
It's tiny, but it's dispersed.
Yes.
Yeah,
Tiny
I like
but
that.
mighty.
Well, Matt, how about the same question when it comes to non-anglers? Why Belize? What's the draw down there?
Yeah, it's, starting with that barrier reef. You've got, tons of dive opportunities, lots of shallow water reefs. So snorkeling is amazing in Belize. Getting to the interior, Belize was kind of the original eco destination. So jungle tours and cave tours and, anything relating to, the Mayan culture and history there, or, rainforest, birders, all of that stuff is fantastic in Belize. And, a lot of us are with families and traveling not just as anglers, and having stuff that checks the other boxes, whether it's with your kids or a non-angling spouse, makes it a great country to go to, outside of the angling.
Yeah, and as big of a tourist destination is, it is primarily for non-angling, for all the things you just mentioned. I love that you brought up the Mayan culture, because we probably should have brought this up in the country facts a moment ago, but this was the cradle of Mayan civilization. I mean, this was the epicenter of the Mayan Empire. And there are hundreds and hundreds of Mayan ruins all throughout the mainland of Belize. Pretty spectacular. And if you're someone that, if you're listening to this podcast, you're probably going down there because you want to fish, but maybe you have non-anglers that want to join you. Maybe you need to mix it up a little bit, fish some days, take some non-angling days. There is so much to see and do down there. It's really incredible.
Absolutely. And, adding on to a fishing trip is a great way to experience that. Everybody wants to go fishing for a week. Maybe you fish 5 days and then jump into, a place in the interior, or even crossing into Guatemala. And, all of that is very, very easy, just partly because of the size of the country.
Yeah, easy to move around, hop around, no problem. Well, we talked about the fact that the waters of Belize and the ecosystem of the Mesoamerican Reef, right? The second largest barrier reef on the planet that goes from north to south, the whole country. It's home to more than 400 different species of fish. But from a game fish and from a fly fishing perspective, what are we looking at, Matt, as far as our main species? What are anglers focusing on when they are taking a trip to Belize?
Absolutely. It's the big three. The Grand Slam species, permit, tarpon, and bonefish are going to be the big three. They're found throughout the country. Snook are also very prevalent. There's barracuda, there's jacks, there's snappers, so plenty of stuff to keep your fly rod busy. But, generally the big three are why people go there. I'd say, outside of the Keys in Cuba, it's probably the most famous tarpon destination in the world. Permit, hands down, tough to beat Belize for permit. And then the bonefish, generally small, but plentiful. And, that makes it great for new anglers. And then they do see some big ones here and there. So they're a little bit spread out throughout the country. We kind of break Belize into 3 basic regions, and North Belize is going to have all 3 in good numbers. Lots of bonefish, lots of permit, lots of tarpon. As you move south, you start to see it become more of a permit fishery. The focus is there. The guides focus on it. The anglers going there, that's what they're signing up for, is the permit sufferfest in some cases. And, there are still tarpon, there are still bonefish, but generally it's permit. And then, the third kind of region would be the outer atolls, Turnip Atoll in particular. Really good bone fishing for Belize out there. Kind of the purest bone fishing in the country, really shallow flats, tailing fish. So
Lots of walk wading.
exactly. Best place to wade out there. And then, seasonally some really good tarpon fishing, and then, permit fishing can be great too.
Yeah. And Brian, I think that's key because there are some destinations. So for example, let's say you're going to the northern coast of the Yucatan, Campeche, San Felipe, those areas, you're there for juvenile tarpon. You're kind of all in. If you're going to the Bahamas, sure, there are some exceptions, but for the most part, you're kind of there to bonefish, right? Yep. With Belize, the big draw is this overall diversity of species, and that is what has always set this destination apart.
Always. Yeah. And there's different levels to it too, where there's easier bone fishing areas, there's more difficult, challenging bone fishing areas. Same with permit and the tarpon size too. It's very uniquely situated to have something for everyone.
And as you guys just pointed out, I mean, it fluctuates throughout the country, which is great, and also at different times of the year, which we'll talk about as well. But again, the biggest draw, if you're listening to this program and you're like, I'm thinking about planning my first saltwater trip or my next saltwater trip, or maybe I've been to the Bahamas and Yucatan, I've never been to Belize. Why should I go? For me, the biggest reason is always you got that diversity of species. You got that availability of really kind of anything is possible on any given day at any time.
It is. It really is.
Yeah, not a lot of destinations can offer that kind of consistency.
No.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about the travel logistics and the basics involved in getting to Belize. Matt, is this an easy place to reach from the States?
Belize is incredibly easy. I'd put it right up there with a place like Cancun as far as getting to from pretty much anywhere in the U.S. If you're close to a major hub, chances are you've got a direct flight to Belize, if not daily, at least once a week. Easy connections, for us coming out of Bozeman, whether it's down to Houston and in or down to Denver and in. Some great flights out of California now, which, has just added to the ease of getting there. If it's not in one day, it's a quick, either a red eye or a one stop overnight. So it's probably easier for me to get to Belize than, Boston.
Right.
I think that as of now, and again, this always changes seasonally, but there's like 16 major U.S. cities where you can catch a direct flight from that city right into the international airport in Belize, of which there's still one. Right. I'm talking about maybe adding a second, but right now it's Belize City. That's it. That's where you fly into. So 16 direct flights from 16 different cities. I think there's additional like 5 or 6 international cities you can also fly to Belize. But it's right now serviced by pretty much every major airline out there. I mean, Delta, American, United, Southwest, Alaska, JetBlue, you name it, you can get direct flights to Belize City.
Yeah, very easy.
Yeah. And then in Canada, like you said, internationally, great options out of Toronto, seasonally from Calgary. It's about as easy as it gets for, heading south.
Yeah. And the nice thing, and you touched on this a second ago, Matt, but most of the time you can get down there in a day, meaning, even from here in Montana, we can leave in the morning, we can be in Belize City by late afternoon and be at our final lodge destination, in time for cocktails and dinner. So oftentimes you can avoid that overnight, both coming and going, pretty quick access. That can be a factor for people. It's like, all right, I want a week-long trip, typically 7 nights, 6 days of fishing. Sometimes if you're going to Cuba, sometimes if you're going to the Bahamas from the West Coast, certainly if you're going to the Indian Ocean, then you got to add some travel days onto that. Right. So it ends up being a 9, 10, 12-day trip all told. With Belize, that ease of access makes it a great option. And the fact that, you might want to do a week-long trip or you might just want to do a weekend, right?
Oh, yeah. Right, a couple days.
Yeah.
It's a more and more, the short trip has come up, leaving on Thursday, coming back Tuesday, building in the long weekend. And Belize is a country where that's very, very doable.
Yeah, and a lot of the lodges offer shorter packages. And because there is such a good network of lodge options, guide and outfitting options down there, I never, ever am an advocate of saying, you can always do it last minute, because we know in this business that's a bad idea if you want the best guides and the best spots and the best dates. But Belize, more so than some of the other saltwater destinations, if you are like, hey, I just found out next month I've got this long weekend, I've got some days off, maybe I'll do a quick shot down to Belize. It's usually possible.
Yeah, and really all you need is a passport. A valid passport's all you need. You don't need a special visa. You don't need any special immunizations or anything like that. It's a good passport from most developed countries is all you need to get to Belize. There's definitely the outliers, but generally
Yeah, if you're coming from like North Korea or Somalia, there may be some additional paperwork involved.
Exactly. Anything in the African continent.
Okay. Right. All right. Well, Brian, let's talk about what happens once you arrive in Belize City. As we mentioned, that's it. There's one international airport. So you fly into Belize City. Actually, the international airport's just outside of the city in Ladyville, it's called. So I've arrived. I've processed through Customs and Immigration. I've picked up my bags. I go out in the main area. What next?
It depends on where you're going to what happens next. If you're hopping on a small little commuter shuttle plane from, say, Tropic Air or Mayan Air, you walk out one door and there's the kiosk for your domestic flight. It's literally, I don't know, 100 steps from the exit of customs.
Maybe, yeah.
And then if not, you're going to go right 40 steps, and there's going to be somebody waiting there with a sign for your car saying you're going to like Belize River Lodge. If you're into an adventure, like what I do a lot is I have a car and I drive from Belize City to wherever my destination is, to Central Belize, Southern Belize, Northern Belize. They have a new highway they just put in, which cuts down the commuting time. And it's a very beautiful and easy stretch to drive to.
Yeah, and it's
super easy to land and get to where you want to go without hassles.
Absolutely. And most of those transfers are going to be a Tropic Air flight that's, 10 to 30 minutes long.
Yeah,
but
maximum.
Driving, if you don't like small airplanes, they're flying little Cessna Caravans. And so I know some people don't like that, but you can drive tip to tip in 4 hours. Yeah. And a lot of the, partners we work with in Southern Belize actually can offer ground transportation. So you get in a big air conditioned van, you get to see the sights. Very easy and lots of options depending on what you want to do and what you want to see on the way to your destination.
It's super easy. I think some people have, they get a little travel anxiety, like some countries where you land in domestic or international, and you have to drive across 20 million people to get to domestic airport. It can cause some anxieties and traffic and Belize is very interesting. You walk out one door and it's there.
Single terminal. So
it's so
it's
easy.
not which A, B, or C am I in. It's you just follow the line through the doors and you're there.
Yeah, and all the baggage handlers recognize fly rods.
Yep.
And especially yellow dog hats. I mean, they always ask for them when they have a going out hat and a working hat. And they identify it right away. And they're going to get you to where you need to go.
Yeah. And when you, if let's say you're flying on Mayan or Tropic to your final destination, that's 15-minute flight to San Pedro. It's, 40-minute flight to the far southern reaches of Belize. You fly any more than 40 minutes, you're out of the country, right?
Yeah, there isn't a flight over.
Yeah, you've left Belize.
And it's easy. You walk in Tropic Air Mayan, you get booked up, walk in to check in through security and go to Jet's Bar and have a
Gotta go to Jets.
and a beer.
That's a rite of passage. Yeah. If you've been to Belize and you've been to Jet's Bar, you know what we're talking about, right?
Exactly.
You want rum punch?
Yes.
No, it's an institution down there for sure. Well, let's go back, and you touched on this a moment ago, Brian, but who is best suited for fishing in Belize? What type of angler is going to do well in a saltwater environment in Belize?
I think the type of angler is going to do well anywhere globally is a very well-prepared angler. The level of ability of skills can dictate where in the world you're going to have a better experience. And I think with Belize, they really offer a never-ever experience, a second-time experience.
First time is you've never been saltwater
fishing. Never been there, and you're worried about the whole gamut. A lot of the lodges have an expert on staff to help with casting. There's an area to do. The guides are generational guides and are very patient. And then you can have, say, an advanced, high experienced angler. There's plenty of great permit guides that will yell at you. But you know what your punishment you're into, and there's, I like the intensity. I don't feel like it's yelling. I feel like we're on a team and we're just excited. Right. And we know that most of the time it's not going to work out in our favor. So I think once you you get into fly fishing, if you're worried about it, it's a great place to go. And if you're advanced and worried that you're going to have like a top tier guide, there are those guides there.
Yeah, and Matt, you would say there's something for everybody. Even if you're experienced, you've been all over the world, you can still go down to Belize and find some great challenges and some big rewards as well.
Absolutely. Like we said, first time fly fishing trip, great operations, all the way up to, we have travelers that they go all over the world. They go to the Seychelles, they go to St. Brandon's, they go to Belize multiple times a year because of the guides and how much they can learn about, permit fishing in particular, the different ways to feed a permit and all of the dynamic stuff that goes into that. It's a lot easier to go to Belize than it is to, the St. Brandon's atoll. And, they do that and they've learned. And then when they go on these other trips, they're infinitely more prepared because of, the skill set that the guides offer countrywide, whether you're chasing tarpon up north or, staring at reef flats in the middle of the country for shallow tailing permit.
Yeah. And again, that diversity, there's something for everybody, which is so cool. You guys both just talked about the guides, and I want to go a little deeper on this topic because I do think that's something that can really and does really set Belize apart from other international saltwater destinations. Brian, let's talk a little bit about what anglers can expect when fishing with a typical Belizean guide. Now, one thing, and we know this from the pandemic through some guide assistance programs that the foundation did, there's about 125 to 150 licensed fly fishing guides in the entire country of Belize.
Yes.
We've fished with most of them. We know pretty much all of them, but that's a stable that is very identifiable. They have to be licensed. But the cool thing, Brian, is that 99.2% of the guides in Belize are Belizean. They're local.
They're all locals.
Yeah.
And that's really amazing of how it's all transitioned there.
Yeah. You cannot be a foreigner really and guide down there. To the best of my knowledge, there have been 3 gringo guides over the years that, lived down there for so long they were able to get licensed, dual citizenship. But, you've got Will Flack in the south, you've got Haywood Curry, Unky Cocker. There was one more who was in the Placencia area. I don't even think he's guiding anymore. But other than that, there are 0 gringo guides down there or foreign guides. It's all Belizean.
Yep, all Belizean.
And they also, what makes this country so cool is they have this great history of generational guides and guiding families. And we see this like up in San Pedro on Ambergris Key with El Pescador. You've now got guides working at the lodge. They're the 3rd generation in their family to be a dedicated professional flats guide.
Absolutely. That right there is a very unique thing for a lot of guides anywhere. I mean, very rarely you find generational of just 1 to 2, but there's 3. And also the whole family. Like my first saltwater guide was in Turniff Atoll at Craig Hayes's place, and he is I fish a lot with Magic Mike, which is his grandson.
Yeah.
And I fish with the uncle and brothers and
cousins
and and their aunts and mothers and grandmas all work there too. It's a very family oriented.
Yeah. And for a lot of these guides, especially the early generation guides, and I think this is worth mentioning, they didn't start out necessarily as fly fishermen way back in the beginning. They got their start as commercial fishermen.
Right.
And this is key because you take someone who is of the sea and from the sea, and they've grown up multi-generationally, as fin fishermen, lobster fishermen, conch fishermen, whatever it is. This is what they do. Their office is the ocean, and they know it intimately. They know it better than anyone. You take that caliber of seafaring professional, and you transition them into a flats guide, and guess what? They know a thing or two about their ecosystem.
They know a lot about it, and they're smart and clever, and they want to work on the water. As commercial fishermen, they want to work on the water, and that's their home, and they felt compelled to. And I think where this is probably going is, as sooner or later, bonefish and tarpon and permit were being harvested, and it's just a simple math. It's like one dead fish is a couple bucks, and a live bonefish is tens of thousands and choose wisely. And they don't want to decimate their fisheries, especially flats fisheries. That's the first one to go usually a lot. And so you took in, the commercial pirate fishermen of their communities and transitioned into fly anglers. They're not necessarily like the guides who are casters of fly rods, but they know the flats unbelievably well. It doesn't matter if they have a fly rod in their hand or not. And I was just there not too long ago when I was with Scully Garba
And Punta Gorda.
Yeah, and I had a friend with me, and he asked, like, "Oh, Scully, how many permit you've caught?" And he's documented every single one. He's like, "Oh, I got 2,862," and he's like, "Wow, like, how are you guiding so much and being able to fish?" And he's like, "Oh, I don't fish."
Right.
And that's kind of when I realized. I mean, after going down there for dozens and dozens and decades, I really didn't realize that either. And he's like, "I'm fishing, I'm guiding, and I'm fishing. I've snorkeled every flat. I know every single back lagoon." Scully has generational guides. His son is guiding too. But he is engaged in fishing, and he wants to protect the area because they want to protect their livelihood. And so you have a connection with the resource and a protection with the resource, and it's done locally by them on their own, and they police their own things. And ironically, of all the places in the world, including the United States, there's only one country that's outlawed the killing of bonefish, tarpon, and permit, which is Belize.
That's right. And that's huge. About 15 years ago, they were the first and still the only country to pass a nationwide law prohibiting the killing of bonefish, permit, or tarpon. You can't harvest them. You can't sell them in the fish market. People have really gotten behind this. And I think one of the biggest reasons, Brian, to what you just mentioned a second ago is, 20 years ago, we would go down to Belize, you'd walk the fish markets, and you would see dead permit, you would see dead bonefish, and they were for sale, as a food source, and they'd be for sale for a few bucks for a bonefish. Well, there were studies that were subsequently done as we were working up to the passage of this catch and release legislation that statistically showed that a live trophy bonefish or a live permit, especially a good-sized permit, instead of being worth a few bucks at a fish market, can be worth tens of thousands of dollars when you factor in what anglers are willing to spend to travel to the country at a lodge with the guides, the food, everything that they're spending in pursuit of these game fish. Well, guess what? Makes a lot of sense to release these fish live so someone else can come back and spend their money trying to catch them. The economics of this are staggering. And, right now, it's close to a $300 million industry in the country of Belize, just flats fishing.
Yep. Just flats fishing.
So you look at the economy, what this provides for Belizeans, for the country of Belize, it's a no-brainer. And that legislation, that catch and release legislation, was huge. And I would argue that since that has passed, the fishing has only gotten better, even though more people are going down and it's more popular and, the infrastructure has been built up with some more lodges and more people guiding. It's still phenomenally good because they protect those resources at all costs.
At all costs.
Absolutely. That's, with that generational guide, they have bought into the conservation aspect of it.
Yeah.
Anytime something's getting, developed or torn up or whatever it may be that is going to impact the flats fishing, the guides are the one who blow the whistle on it. They say, "Look, this is wrong. We see dredgers here. We need to do something about this. This is not just going to, that's going to employ 5 people for some guy who doesn't even live here."
Right.
Versus there's 40 of us that work in this area that if that thing disappears, we're, compromised. And so they've bought into that and they help with it. And, it trickles down into the anglers that go there and they see how much the guides love the area and their fishery.
They're proud of it.
Helps. They're
They
proud.
love it.
Yeah, the second big piece of legislation, which came about 5 years ago, and this was a long time in the works, but first off, you had the catch and release legislation, which was huge. That was step one. Step two, which was another big win for Belize and for the species down there, was that they banned gill netting in the country. Right. Again, nationwide ban of all gill netting. Now, gill nets are a very indiscriminate way to commercially fish, because gillnet doesn't differentiate between snappers and jacks and permit and bonefish, right? So you put a gillnet at a creek mouth in a coastal area or on a flat, and it can wipe out schools of bonefish or permit, large numbers of tarpon that take a long time to come back, years and years and years. Well, by banning gillnets, that was another massive step in protecting the resource and really helping to enhance the populations of these fish that people are coming down to target.
I think it's a two-step process, like you said. The size of fish and the numbers of fish are much different now than they were when I first started going down there 20 years ago. You know, back then you'd find lots of little small schoolies, kind of so you see on the Instagrams.
The permit.
Yeah. And now you're seeing the schools bigger fish, more diverse sizing of schools.
Yeah, generations.
Yeah. And so I think the first one of not killing them led to now, and then now removing that indiscriminate curtain of death.
Yeah, the gill nets. Exactly. I like that. The curtain of death. That's what they are. Yeah.
They string across the river and it just kills everything.
Yeah.
And those two things are, I think Belize moving forward is just going to get better and better and better and better.
Yeah.
And Matt, what you said is those guys are a first line of defense. I mean, I was just down there with the Will Bauer flat.
Yep.
Debacle, and the guys are the first ones to blow the whistle. They're the first ones there. They're getting the news agencies locally, contacting people out of the country,
industry.
I went down there and saw firsthand what was going on, and then while I was down there for a few weeks, slowly, the pressure from those guides and the community, because it is a legitimate trickle down economics. Yep. If I'm just a commercial fisherman selling a fish, my money only deals with one person. Right. But if you have a lodge or a guide staff, we still have to buy fuel and food and lunches and tackle. And it literally does trickle down. Everybody is invested. Even if you're not a guide, you are invested in these flats fisheries. It's vital to your
It's a scaled economy.
So when somebody comes in illegally and starts dredging, you don't need to try to rile up people. They're up in arms. Yeah,
they got paying attention.
Yeah, they're in boats with pitchforks.
Yeah, and you were talking about Will Bauer Flat. What you're referencing is a really important flat in a fishery that's in southern Belize by Hopkins, where overnight, a dredger appeared, and they were basically going to rip up this flat, and the guides, within hours, were mobilized, spreading the word, and they're paying attention, which is huge.
They are paying attention. Yeah. They're out there every day, so they see the illegal sneakiness. They know if somebody's nefarious actions coming in.
Right. Yeah, that's important. Well, obviously, professional guides, seasoned guides, multi-generational guides. I would also add, a lot of these guides are very good at teaching. Right. Yep. They're educational guides. They're very communicative. Now, there are different scales. And I think one of the things, Matt, when you're working with clients, you're figuring out what they're looking for in a trip, what their expectations are, what their skill set is, what they're trying to accomplish on this trip. Do they want to, improve their casting? Do they want to improve their fish sighting capabilities? Do they want to, just get better and more comfortable in a flat skiff? You really have the ability to match them up with the right guide so that it's that perfect fit.
Absolutely. And it's, it's a big part of what we do at Yellow Dog of finding the right destination and the right operation in that destination, and all the way down to the guide. If you're traveling with your 15-year-old son and, he's been on the trout streams a bunch, or maybe he's, fished off the coast in, the Carolinas or whatever it is, but it's his first true flats fishing. There's a lot that goes into that. And having guides that, can explain what they're doing. Hey, we're moving because of this, or let's see where, hey, your cast is, you're rushing your cast, from casting mechanics, even though maybe not all of the guides are, pure fly anglers, they know how to teach a cast. And, going back to the English speaking, that helps.
It does.
When it's like, I love the guides in Mexico, nothing against the guides in Mexico, but they speak Spanish, and that's part of their culture. And so sometimes the deeper, breakdown of why we're doing this and how to do this can get lost in translation. And, flats fishing can be a very high intense, the temperature in the flat skiff can get pretty high. If, there's a permit, you've got to make a quick cast. How do we do it? And those guides are really good at managing that and helping our anglers and any angler succeed which they're not just there to push around a boat and, throw it over there. It's like, hey, let's do this. Let's get better. And, being able to say, hey, it's your first one. Let's go get some bonefish.
Yeah.
Bonefish are honest. Bonefish play nice. Okay, you've got those. Now let's, graduate to tarpon or permit, and having all those species there with the skill set the guides have makes it a great place.
Absolutely. Well, I want to talk for just a second about seasonality. All right. There are, different fisheries have different windows. If you're headed to South America, there's a defined season. If you're headed to New Zealand, there is a window of which you're going to fish. With Belize, it is very much a year-round fishery, but there are, in fact, defined seasons and peak times to fish Belize, right, Matt?
Yeah. It's, kind of our long-standing thing is, the best time to go to Belize is when you can. It's, further south, close to the equator. It's got a very consistent year-round climate. It's about 80, 82 degrees all year round. There's definitely, some fluctuations there. You can have, the winter months with some cold fronts, and you can have, hurricane season, obviously, coming up is what kind of looms over everybody's head. But generally, any time can be good. You want the weather to be nice. You could be down there at the end of April, the best time to be there, and it'll blow 40 miles an hour and be cloudy. That's not good for fishing, but you could be there on New Year's Day and catch a grand slam because you've got light wind and good sun. Going through hurricane season, generally outside of a big storm, it's really, really nice. And you talk to a lot of the guides down there, a lot of people who've spent a lot of time down there. Those are some of their favorite months: August, September, October. Hurricanes are not avalanches or tornadoes where they come out of nowhere. You see them coming, and you can plan around them with some trip insurance and just being ready for that factor. But there's really not a quote unquote bad time to go to Belize.
Yeah, it's always going to be weather dependent, and we're still trying to figure out how to predict that. but anyone who's saltwater fish knows that you go when you can go. You try to stack the deck in your favor as far as seasonality, maybe tides, things like that. But weather is going to dictate ultimately how any of these fisheries deliver. But it is a year-round fishery. Yeah. All these lodges and guides operate 12 months a year. The rainy season in Belize is technically kind of our summer months, like June, July. Hurricane season, as you mentioned, Matt, that's a factor, but again, it's not predictable. And technically hurricane season is like 6 months a year. It's, kicks off in June, ends in December. So that's considered the hurricane season, but with everything changing in the last few years like it has, it's gotten kind of unpredictable. And again, outside of a major storm event that does hit Belize, the fishing during that time can be outstanding.
Right. And you bring up the rainy season, which, kind of coincides with that hurricane season, but the rain down there, especially on the coast where you're fishing, it rains at night. Yep. It's not, it's July, it's going to rain from, 7 a.m.
24/7.
p.m. It's going to rain at night. Maybe the interior, the rainforest, they get a lot of rain those months. But once you're out on the flats and, the coastal areas, whether it's Ambergris in the north or, down towards Placencia and Punta Gorda in the south, it's raining at night, which is kind of nice, kind of cools things off, a little bit of a reset. And, it's a great time to be down there.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of times when it is raining, it's moving through pretty quickly. Yep. So you might have a little squall. Oftentimes you can see it. It's like, okay, here it comes. Then it passes on and, you're sunny again and you're back in the game.
Yeah, not unlike the Mountain West. You get summertime monsoon season. It rains like hell from 3 to 4, and then it's back to beautiful.
Yeah, right. Absolutely. Well, Brian, another big topic that we discuss a lot with clients and people that are researching trips is how to fish Belize. And what I mean by how is basically the decision to either book and stay at a lodge, with all-inclusive guiding and an accommodations package where everything is tight and really easy, versus the DIY trip, the do-it-yourself experience, where you are going down and, you're kind of booking an Airbnb and you're going to just figure it out when you get there and you're going to fish on your own.
Right.
And we get asked about this all the time. Brian, are there legitimate DIY opportunities in Belize?
DIY in saltwater is an interesting topic. In some places in the world, there are legitimate DIY places. Belize, no. I mean, I've spent a couple decades, staying at Flax Flat and San Pedro, and I've driven the golf cart. I've fished rocky points in the back bays, and I've walked the docks in Cape Cocker, and sure, you could maybe walk a dock and find a bonefish, and if there's somebody else there, which is a lot of other shop people doing trips there, then that's over. And Rocky Point, I always felt like going up there, I'm taking away from the locals. If they show up there with a client and I'm there with my little golf cart and a cooler, and they're just looking at me, they know me, and they're just like, dude, really? And so I kind of was like, this probably, although to me it was like I can go maybe catch a bonefish or get my ass kicked by a permit, but the reality is no. The reality is you need a boat there, and you have to be a local licensed Belizean to own a boat. And so the reality is no. The reality is no. I mean, you're going to go to the Bahamas for your DIY, and there's a few places in Mexico and Belize, but the more we've had social media, the more that everybody knows there, and the more the videos are out, and the more that DIY, those small opportunities that were behind closed doors that everybody talked about are gone.
Yeah. There are a few places you can do it down there. I mean, again, you mentioned ambergris. Yes, you can go down and kind of dirtbag it, and you can find a few flats to fish on, and again, the docks and things like that, key caulker. But 97% of all of the grounds, the fishing grounds in Belize, you need a boat to get there. You have to be mobile, and you have to be able to cover ground. The other thing worth mentioning is that especially in the northern part of the country, you don't have a lot of hard white sand flats like you can find in the Bahamas, as you just mentioned, where you can go out and truly wade for miles on your own. In Belize, they're soft mud flats. Good luck wading some of those. You're going to be, up to your chest and gunk if you're trying to go out there and wade on your own. So, yeah, the DIY opportunities, a lot of talk about that lately. It's just not as realistic, and it's not as easily found in Belize as it is in some other saltwater fisheries.
It sounds great to the novice angler who's never gone anywhere. And the only person I know personally who wades those flats in northern Belize is Yvonne Schnard. With snowshoes. And so they drop him off. He's got his snowshoes, and he can, this is, probably hasn't been there since, the Buccaneers and Bones type of era, but that was his deal. But not everybody's going to fly down there with snowshoes.
We don't sell snowshoes in the shop. Maybe we need to add that for the DIY angler.
No, and I always think back to my very first trip to Belize, and the trip that I fell in love with Belize on. We went down and bummed it for a month on key caulker.
Right.
And we thought, we're fishing guides. We know what we're doing. We were definitely geared up. We had all the gear we could ever want. Turns out that doesn't help when you've got to go through chest deep or deeper water with knee deep mud.
Right.
And it was a struggle. And the best days that we had on that trip were fishing with guides. I mean, it really, it opened up a whole lot of like, we need a boat. We need to be able to get to where things are. And, flats fishing in general, it's harder to read than a trout stream. There's a lot of dynamics to it that, just show up and the fish are there. And without, local knowledge of a great guide, you're probably going to struggle for most of a DIY trip in a place like Belize.
You are. And I think the other thing that people don't want to talk about a lot is there's one type of person who wants to wade fish and one type of person who wants to boat fish. And they have to realize that in some places in Belize, the reason why they want you in the boat is as live coral. And so some of the places, the DIY place, you're just going to smash the coral to death. And so they want you in a boat to protect their home, their environment.
And to protect you.
And protect you.
We talked about ambergris and stuff. There's saltwater crocodiles there.
Yes,
and there's some big ones. And that's they're real. And I know that the likelihood is low, but when you're super focused on the fishing.
Well, I always, when DIY conversations come up, my philosophy over the years has always been, it's a very good example of you get what you pay for. If you want to go down and dirtbag it and try to do it on the super cheap, that's cool. We all did it back in the day, right? Yeah. Especially when we were getting started. We were all broke fishing guides, but you get what you pay for. And, for that reason, we don't even offer like DIY operations through Yellow Dog because rarely produce and they're rarely consistent, and people oftentimes struggle. But I think that's worth covering. And, when you talk about the advantages of the lodge packages, and I will mention this, not every lodge package is off the charts expensive.
No.
We have 16 operations in Belize, and it's the whole spectrum of price points. You've got your super high-end, deluxe, more expensive operations, and you've also got your no-frills, high-value, fishing-focused operations where you can go down there and it's a great price point. But it's all, all of these packages, they're typically all-inclusive. They typically employ the most seasoned guides who are working the most and who are really dialed in. And that's, these are the advantages of these lodge and outfitting packages. You're fishing with the best guides. Everything's included. They make it easy. And again, you can spend, a lot, or you can spend very little, and you can still find great quality depending on what your budget is and what exactly you're looking for.
I mean, you're right about that, because the price that would say your DIY price, well, that same price for the DIY, I can go fish with a lodge in Punta Gorda. Mm-hmm. I can rat hole a couple $100 away a month and save for a year. If I'm a broke photographer or a fishing guide, that's doable. That's what you did. You just rat hole money and you get down there, and that still pays for all your meals and your lodging and your guiding day
with some of the best guides in the country.
Yeah, absolutely.
And no, you're spot on. There's this huge range, and there are places that definitely work better. You're going to get what you pay for. And if you're newer, being at a more established lodge is going to provide a better safety net for your trip. If it's the first foray into saltwater fly fishing, spend a couple extra bucks and you're going to learn a whole hell of a lot more. You're going to get more out of the trip. You're going to really enjoy yourself better. And then you're like, oh, all I need is a bed and a great guide. Well, then there's those operations as well.
Right.
And, it's kind of going back to something for everybody, the whole way.
And there are day trip offerings. Now, let's say you're going down on a family vacation, right? It's spring break. You got the kids. Everybody's within. You're like, I can't fish, 6 straight days. I just want to get out for a couple days when I'm going down there. I even hate saying this, the words cruise ship, but let's say you're down on a cruise and you got to live in Belize. There are day trip options. And so that can be lined up. We've got a whole section on the website that talks about day trips. So it's possible to book just, 1 or 2 days to add on to an overall Belize trip. But I will say this about day trips. You got to be careful. There's really good guides that offer day trips. You got to do your homework. But just because someone has access to a boat does not make them a legit flats guide.
Right.
And we see that in some parts of the country. It's like, yeah, man, I could take you out, no problem. Pay me under the table.
I see that here at home. You know what I mean? It's like I'm going to pay $700, $600 for a day trip, but I'm going to go with somebody that is a reputable guide rather than, it's my second year and I'm sure they're great and they're going to offer a great experience, but we see the same thing at home. Like you're going to get what you pay for.
You get what you pay for. It always comes back to that.
It does research.
And in Belize, we don't necessarily do the booking of day trips, but I'm always happy to talk to people about, hey, here's the options, or here's who you should reach out to. If you're going to be in Placencia, reach out to Eworth Garbert. If you're going to be in Hopkins, reach out to Will Flack, or San Pedro, reach out to Will Flack, and they'll get you on the water a little bit, and
with a legit guide.
Yeah. Exactly. You're not having cousin Ronnie off the beach taking you.
Yeah.
Yes.
Borrowed his cousin's boat for when he wasn't lobstering that day.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I want to shift gears a little bit, and I want to talk about equipment, because I think this is a big question that people have when they're thinking about a saltwater trip anywhere. And we'll start off, when we talk about these lodge packages, let's say you've booked a lodge package, right? Do you need to bring all of your gear with you, or, can you rely on the lodges or the guides to have what you're going to need, Matt?
Yeah. So yes and no to all of it. It largely depends on the lodge. As you can imagine, the ones that are a little bit more all-inclusive, probably higher on the price scale, they're either going to have, rental equipment or loaner equipment there, which is a great way to get into it. You get down to some of the more bare bones, hardcore fishing destinations, you need to bring everything that you are going to want. The guides typically have some stuff, but it's going to that's backup. Your rods didn't make it through the plane. Your rods broke when you got down there. It's not the first choice to use the guide stuff. It goes a long way to bring all of the flies you're going to need, the rods you're going to need, the lines you're going to need, all of that stuff. is important to have down there. And the bigger operations can backfill what you do bring. But it's hard to get stuff down there. If a rod breaks, they can't just run down to Four Corners to the Yellow Dog Fly Shop and get a new one, or send it back to Scott or Sage or Winston or whoever and get it fixed and back. What they've got for the season is what they've got. And, so even if they do offer it, somebody trips on the beach taking a bunch of loaner rods in and they break 10 of them at a time.
Ooh, that would
hurt.
10 at a time.
But it helps to bring something. There are places and
bring your own gear.
Bring your own gear.
Well, let's talk about that gear. What are the go-to kind of Belize setups for rods and reels? And I say setups plural because going back to the species opportunities, the diversity, the availability of all these different scenarios, this is not a one rod destination for good reason, right? So what are we looking at as far as, okay, I want to gear up for a trip to Belize. I realize that I'm going to potentially have shots at bonefish and permit and tarpon. What am I bringing down for my primary setups?
Yeah, and in a perfect world, you could bring 4 rods. You've got, a really fast 7 or an 8 weight for your bonefish, a 9 for permit, a 10 for smaller tarpon, and then, an 11 or 12 weight for big tarpon. I'd say most people bring 3, and 8, 9, 10 or 8, 9, 11. The rods do have crossover. You can use, a 10 for permit and, vice versa. You could use a 9 for bonefish. Because of the species diversity and how accessible those species are within the course of a day, trying to switch out a permit leader for a tarpon leader, that's a blown opportunity. Have the rod set up. You've got your bonefish rod, you've got a permit rod, and you've got a tarpon rod. And that way you're ready to go, because in a lot of places you move off one flat and then it's guides like, hey, grab the tarpon rod, here they come.
Right.
And being able to have a designated setup is going to help. And you can, backfill with different spools for intermediate lines for tarpon or, stuff like that. But that's going to be a little easier to change out versus the quick hit, put it down, grab the other one. We've got a big permit coming.
You want to be prepared and ready to go.
Yep.
You never know what's coming at you.
No, you don't. And I think a lot of people that come from the trout world, the biggest thing is trout are stationary and we're feeding them the food. Say you have a rising trout on the Madison or Henry's Fork, it's going to be there, and we're feeding the food to them. Where the flats fish, those fish are always moving. So just because the permit is tailing now, in 3 seconds, it might be moving 15 feet to the left or gone forever. And so you don't have time to be like, oh, let's switch out here. Let's re-rig this rod. You have to be ready to go.
Yeah, that's key. And, most of the guides down there, with the exception of the turn-off operations, are fishing out of pongas, which is a phenomenal fishing boat. They're usually, anywhere from 23 to 27 foot pongas, plenty of space.
Plenty.
I think it's so crucial to have, 3 or 4 rods rigged and ready, because that's exactly it. You might be bone fishing. So you got your 8 weight in your hand, and all of a sudden the guide says, I got 3 permit that just came onto the flat. Grab your 9 weight. And if you can set that down, quickly grab your permit rod, it's already rigged and you're in the game, now you've got that shot. If you look at the guide and you're like, hold on, I got to actually change out my leader and I'm going to tie on a crab, the guy's going to be shaking his head being like, man, that door's closed.
Can you pass me my backpack? My flies are in there.
Exactly.
So being rigged and ready is crucial in Belize, because you never know what's coming at you at any given time. Yeah. So I think that's really important. As far as gear goes, fly lines, most of the time it's a floating tropical line game, although you did mention, Matt, that sometimes for certain tarpon situations, an intermediate or sink tip line, when they're maybe in the channels rolling early in the morning, nice to have that for tarpon, a couple different lines, but bonefish and permit, always a floating line game.
Yep. Yeah. Tropical floating. If you got to bring one style of line, that's the line to bring. You're going to get a lot of use out of an intermediate or sinking line. You think to the Placencia area where you are permit fishing, but they do get tarpon in those channels. So, if you're somewhere like Blue Horizon, you get off the permit flats or you're between tides, having a sinking or intermediate line.
Or bad weather day. It's like, well, let's just scratch out a day. It's like, well, what do we got? Well, we have a nice channel here. It's like, well, what are you going to sit at the lodge and do nothing? Or
let's go fishing.
Yeah, let's go fishing.
Yeah, that's right. So fly lines are crucial. And I think it's something that people oftentimes overlook. They spend big money on a new rod, a new reel, and they say, oh, I've got that old 9-weight fly line left over. It's like, do not skimp on your fly lines.
It's the most important piece.
I'm a disciple of, like, every time I'm going on a big trip, I'm putting new lines on because it makes such a difference. It really does.
I'm a daily line cleaner.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. If you're not
Personally.
diligent about, not only while you're on the trip cleaning your stuff, but when you get home, last thing you want is a line that had some bug spray get on it and
cracked
sit
and
there
broken
and
and
pull
dirty.
it off and peels the coating
Casts
off.
like crap. Yeah.
Planned all year for your trip and you blow it because your $100 fly line is falling apart.
That's right. And you just needed that extra 4 feet to get it in front of everybody, and you didn't do it. Absolutely. Well, other key pieces of gear. How about wading boots? Do you need wading boots in Belize?
For most of Belize, you're just going to want the little, the zip-on dive booties are going to be totally appropriate. You're in and out of the boat, so they're quick, they're on and off. Can we touch on, Northern Belize, there's not a lot of wading, viable wading opportunities. Southern Belize a little bit more, but it's still kind of in and out of the boat. You're not, walking for miles along a flat. So for the most part, just the zip-on booties are great. The exception would be the tourniquet. Some people can get by with the booties. They've got more coral and, some little bit more rugged flats out there that a standard flats boot is going to be a better option.
Yeah.
I think you have to be ready to go at a moment's notice. If you're pulling up and also the permit goes to, say it's a little too shallow, the bonefish is too shallow, you got to get out of the boat now.
Yeah.
So you don't have time to put on a sock and then put on a neoprene sock and lace one boot and do the rest. The fish is gone. You have to have something that's going to be slipping on, get out of the boat quickly and efficiently, and then getting back in the boat.
Yeah, but bring them with you because you will do some wading in a lot of these places. That's pre-trip research. Find out how much wading opportunities there actually are, and then bring the appropriate footwear. No doubt.
And it's a lot of what you want to do.
Yep.
If you don't want to wade, then
Don't bring boots.
Don't bring boots, and it makes it real easy.
That's right. Another key piece of equipment, sunglasses. Oh my gosh, one of the most important things you can bring on any fishing trip, but especially a flats trip. I always say spend good money on the best glass or lens you can buy. It makes a difference. When you can't see those fish, when you can't spot the fish, you have a hard time being in the game. And, a great lens, a backup lens. You always want to bring a couple pairs, a low light lens for early mornings or overcast days.
If you're fishing, say you go out early with El Pescador Gordy in the morning, early for permit, or Central Belize where you're with like Will's guys, you're leaving in the dark and you're getting there at first light, and you need some eye protection.
Yep.
Just from your own the hooks, but you also need to be able to see, and you have to have a pair of low light glasses.
I typically bring at least 4 pairs of glasses. I've got a low light set. I've got the darker copper amber set. I've got backup sets, and then I like to have you're sitting at the bar going through town set, because the last thing you need is you're spilling a drink on your nice sunglasses for flats fishing. So having that part of your kit covered from top to bottom, low light, dark light, high sun to time off the water. I personally have pretty sensitive eyes, so I really pay attention to the glasses I'm bringing and having extras, because
It's super important.
if you can't see, you can't fish.
I'd rather have good sunglasses and a good fly line, good leaders and flies, and an okay rod.
Yep.
Yeah. I never thought about the bar wear. That's important, like the Maverick glasses, for after fishing, just to look cool.
So when you fall down and break your glasses, it's not your fishing glasses.
Right. Well, it's, you can stuff them in your pocket, and you're traveling with them through the plane and all that.
Well, other imperative items obviously all revolve around your fly selection. And we could actually do a whole episode just on flies for Belize. So we'll just touch on this quickly. But when it comes to putting together a good selection for Belize, diversity is key because you're going to have a lot of different species opportunities down there, as we discussed. And you need to be able to adapt to changing conditions at any given time, all right? Different water depths, changing feeding behavior, weather scenarios. You need to go broad in your fly selection because, again, there's so many different opportunities and so many changing situations. Bryan, you've talked about, kind of the why of a fly pattern and the how you fish it factor. Talk to us a little bit about that.
I think, Belize is very diverse with the types of fishing. So the fly patterns that say work in one area will not work in the other area based on the type of environment. And, if you're in a bay fishing in deep water your shallow flats flies are going to have a hard time fishing well in that, and your deep water flies will not fish well in shallow water. And so I think a lot of times anglers, we forget why a pattern is created. It really matters, and how you fish it, whether it's a streamer of why it's created and how you fish it, to a crab pattern, to a shrimp. And I think that those really matter. And the one we all know is a merkin. And it's very interesting when you learn why it was created. Why is the weight placement? Why is that material so it lands softly? Why is the drop slower than, say, a heavier crab? Why would you want that? And then how do you fish those? Those really matter.
They do. And, sink rate is so important. People get very caught up in the pattern, the color of that pattern, and the hook size. But oftentimes people ignore the sink rate.
The sink rate.
Sink rate is everything. And let's make it simple, right? Let's say you're fishing a size 4 gotcha. Right? That's called a size 6 because it's Belize. They're small, right? So a size 6 gotcha. Well, it's important, when I go into my box, I've got size 6 gotchas tied 3 different ways.
Yeah.
Right? I've got super light size 6 gotchas for skinny water, delicate presentation, quiet lay down on the water. I've got gotchas tied with, say, bead chain eyes for kind of a mid-sink, slightly deeper flats. Maybe there's a little chop on the water. And then I've got that same size 6 gotcha tied with a barbell eye to dive fast for deeper flats. Let's say it's blowing hard and you can get away with a little bit, more of a presentation and a lay down on that water and not spook the fish. But those different sink rates, even for the same pattern and the same size hook, are super important.
Beyond important. You have to have them.
Got to have them, especially with permit.
Yeah. And it'd be silly to get all the way down there and you come in a situation and it's like, oh my God, if I just had something that cost $4, I'd be in the game.
That's right. Worth bringing up. I want to close out this episode, but we'll make it really easy for people here as far as a quick conversation on flies. I'm going to ask you guys by species, 1 or 2 of your favorite must-have fly patterns. And again, we're not going to get into sizes or sink rates, but just the pattern that you love down there. Let's start off with tarpon flies. Matt, what's your go-to pattern down there?
Yeah, Belize tarpon. I like the old school. A cockroach would be number 1. And then, in that vein, a tarpon bunny or black death style, very classic tarpon flies are going to be my favorite for Belize.
How about you, Brian? Go-to tarpon fly?
I'm an old school feather fly too. I'm a diggler, a cockroach style, run around Sioux. Depends on where I'm at, but something's very thin.
Yeah. I would say for me, it's probably one of Dougie McKnight's tarpon flies.
Yeah.
The home invader tied on a tarpon hook. One thing that's kind of interesting is that over the last several years, we've seen tarpon patterns in general, regardless of the style or what pattern it is, just going a little smaller. Very much the way the keys have gone. Back in the day when you could throw a size 3/0, Stu Apt style tarpon fly, that pattern's still killer, but now you're seeing them on much smaller hooks, little mistier hooks, which I think is worth mentioning. We especially see that as a factor in northern Belize for tarpon.
Yeah, Savannah flats or something.
Yeah, the smaller flies. I mean, and don't ignore having some big profile flies. Yeah. We talked about deeper water or places like the Belize River Lodge where you're fishing in dirty water and having a big tarpon snake, or we just had a guest get back and said the top fly at the lodge that week was a seducer.
Right.
That's about as old of a tarpon fly as it gets. That's right. A big profile.
Welcome to 1972.
Right.
That's
and that was
killer.
and that's the one that got it done. So that range of sizes and colors. And I think tarpon, you can kind of ignore the weights and stuff like that for the most part, but color. Having dark to light, and then simple is always good.
How about top bonefish flies?
Top bonefish flies for Belize, I'd have to go with 2, a Christmas Island special and Vervaeka's mantis shrimp would be my top 2 for Belize.
There you go. Typically smaller sizes, some 6s, even some 8s.
Yep, 6s, 8s, turnfetol, even some 10s for some of those situations. But those 2 flies would get it done for me.
How about you, Brian? Bonefish flies?
Same. Exactly the same.
Yeah. Again, sink rates are so important on bonefish flies, size of hooks. But, bonefish, and you said this back in the beginning of the program, my favorite thing about bonefish is they're typically an honest fish. And we've talked about that on this program in several different episodes. When you do your job as an angler, you fish the right fly, you put it in the right place, you have the right cast and presentation, oftentimes they're going to do their job and reciprocate, and they're going to eat that pattern. That's why I love bonefish so much.
Yeah, no, they're great.
Yeah, it's one of the greatest game fish ever.
Absolutely. Permit.
That's I could probably break it into North and South Belize. North Belize, probably a bigger spawning type shrimp, and then South Belize, a camo crab.
Yeah, like a modeled bower crab type pattern.
Yeah, bower, back to bower flat, a bower crab, a camo crab, something very crabby for Southern Belize, whereas North Belize, something shrimpy, maybe something that's got a little bit more movement in it, an EP shrimp or crab.
Spawning shrimp.
Spawning shrimp, that type of style.
How about you, Brian?
We're talking permit?
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm allowed to say. Northern Belize, Christmas Island Special, tied bigger. I fish those a lot with like Will and those guys. It's a very good
Like
pattern.
a size 2 or 4?
Yep.
Yeah.
And then also Doug has a fly called the Tingham.
Oh, the Tingham.
Which is really good for that.
Smashes permit.
Yeah, deep water to, not very shallow, but you're kind of deep water column. And then Central Belize, you cannot go down there without a camo crab. I think a long time ago, the bower crab kind of set the style, and now we're just going a little smaller.
Yep, they're very similar style fly, but that's the style you need down there.
Tan and olive.
Yep.
Yeah, we're seeing say a surge in popularity the last couple years recently of the Alflexo crab, Gerbex pattern. That's starting to deliver in Belize for permit. That's been great, but. I'm kind of with you, Matt. Shrimp patterns, spawning shrimp, Peterson's, the Puglisi stuff. McKnight's Tingham is basically a spawning shrimp style fly. Those can be deadly for fish, especially when you get fish in a little deeper water. Schools of permit, maybe it's 3 fish, maybe it's 12 fish, maybe they're moving, they're cruising slowly. That can be deadly. So, a really good selection of shrimp patterns for permit in Belize is imperative.
For sure, Peterson's, it's designed that you can strip it faster. So if you have to get in front of schools and, the strong arm, and you can get somebody to make a little strong arm is taking a American style, but you're allowed to strip it a little faster. With Dave
It's got
Stokes
that keel
and those,
on there. That's a
those
deadly
guys
fly.
really designed a really good fly.
And that's another thing to kind of keep in mind. We talked about the why is a fly created. Well, it's how you fish that fly.
Yep.
And when you look at the different flies, and at a tango, you can move that fly. A Peterson spawning shrimp, you can move that fly. A bower crab, a camo crab, a danger muffin, a flexo. It's a very specific way to fish that fly.
Yeah, you'll spin the faster you strip a fly is it'll spin, and so natural crabs don't spin, and natural shrimp don't either. So a lot of those patterns are designed of how you're supposed to fish it, and I think that gets lost a little bit in today's pattern selections.
Yep, absolutely.
Instagram will solve it all.
Totally.
Well, we've covered some great topics here, guys, and we've jammed a lot of information into this first of 2 episodes dedicated to Belize. In our next episode, part 2 of our Belize series, we're going to tour the country from north to south. We're going to talk about specific destinations and locations in the country. If you're thinking about a trip to Belize, you will for sure want to tune in to the next episode. But last question, and I'm going to give you 30 seconds to answer this, Matt. In this first episode, talk to me for a moment about safety. Is Belize still a safe place to visit, and what do people need to know when they're traveling to Belize?
Yeah, by and large, Belize is very safe. There are parts of Belize that have, there's challenges like anywhere in the world. Most of that is going to be concentrated around Belize City. And the nice thing is that when you're there to fish, you generally aren't really leaving the airport and going through those parts of Belize City. You're in and out. You get up to a place like San Pedro and North Belize, where it's the busiest tourist area in Belize. And if you go looking for trouble, there is absolutely trouble to be found. But if you stick with the program, stay on relatively good behavior, use your head, you're going to avoid those situations, just like if you were in Denver or Atlanta or, anywhere USA. So, when you compare it to some other places, by and large, Belize is not dealing with as big of challenges there. It'd be wrong to say there are no issues, but by and large, for tourists, I mean, tourism is a huge part of their world down there, from the economy and just culturally. They like taking care of people, and which is, you know, why it's such a great place to be there and why it's so safe.
For sure.
Yeah. Be smart, use your head, just like anywhere in the world you would travel. That's the number one rule.
Anywhere. Just because you're on vacation doesn't mean you get a pass, you know. I mean, just be smart. Have global rescue, you know, go to reputable lodge, use reputable guides, let somebody know what your itinerary is doing, just like you would if I was going anywhere to Chicago.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, good advice on that. And thank you guys so much for being here. This is a really good conversation, and more to come on part 2 as we continue our conversation on where to fish in Belize and what the options are. And that is it for this episode of Waypoints. Be sure to visit yellowdogflyfishing.com to plan and research your next fishing trip, and to sign up for newsletters and notifications of new podcast episodes delivered right to your inbox. You can also download the latest Yellow Dog catalog, check out the travel blog, check out the retail offerings, and sign up for insider deals and specials. Be sure to join us on our next episode of Waypoints. And remember, no matter where you go or what you're doing, get outside and get on the water, because no one ever regretted a life of adventure.
This has been another episode of Waypoints, the podcast of fly fishing travel and adventure angling. Waypoints is produced by BRYAN GREGSON, with music provided by the Steep Canyon Rangers. Visit yellowdogflyfishing.com for more destination profiles, travel news, and expert advice, and be sure to join us for our next episode.